Good afternoon. Welcome to the Atlanta Council. My name is David Livingston, and I'm a Deputy Director here in our Global Energy Center, responsible for our advanced energy and climate portfolio. As we work to build out a robust set of programming aimed at the technologies, the policies, and the markets of tomorrow, it is a great pleasure to be hosting Mr. DeVito here today for an exciting event on the role that the Department of Interior plays in America's advanced energy future. It's also a pleasure to be hosting this event today with so many familiar faces in the audience and such a distinguished set of guests. I'd like to thank the Department of Interior for its cooperation with today's event, and I'd also like to thank our terrific staff here at the Atlanta Council, especially Becca Hunzinger, for putting this event together today. The Department of Interior is an often overlooked pillar of the American energy architecture. It manages 1/5 of the land in the United States, 35,000 miles of coastline, 1.7 billion acres of the outer continental shelf, and it also oversees 700 million acres of subsurface minerals. It is responsible not only for managing this wealth, this natural capital, if you will, but also overseeing the conditions under which some of this wealth is responsibly and sustainably transformed into income in the form of energy production. Indeed, the Department of Interior is the second largest source of government revenue after the IRS. While the majority of these revenues have traditionally been generated through fossil fuel production, there is also a significant opportunity to harness America's abundant renewable energy potential on public lands. From offshore wind to large-scale solar power, to ocean wave energy, to geothermal power, the lands and waters of the United States are replete with opportunities to produce clean, modern, and affordable energy for American citizens. Against this backdrop, it is a great pleasure to welcome to the Atlanta Council today Mr. Vincent DeVito, Counselor to Secretary Zinke at the Department of the Interior. Mr. DeVito has responsibility for coordinating energy policy over the department's many individual bureaus, as well as with other government agencies, and has been an advocate for the role that advanced energy can and should play in the Trump administration's energy policy. He previously held several senior leadership roles at the U.S. Department of Energy and in many state energy offices. Following his address, Mr. DeVito will be joined on stage for an armchair conversation with Cynthia Quarterman, a distinguished fellow here at our Global Energy Center. Ms. Quarterman has served in key leadership roles in the Department of Transportation and the Department of the Interior, including serving as former director of the Minerals Management Service in the Clinton administration. I can think of no one better to lead a pragmatic and frank conversation on the role of advanced energy across American lands and American waters. So, without further ado, it is a pleasure to welcome to the podium Mr. Vincent DeVito.
Thank you. That was an outstanding introduction. I appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, for coming today and listening to us. Hopefully you'll have some good takeaways that you can share and we can continue the discussion. Thank you everybody here from the Atlanta Council that helped put this together and everybody from DOI as well. I love that you started with the stats. So here I have prepared remarks, but I never use them. They're very good actually, but I'm going to start with these prepared stats. It's fascinating. One of the things that I have learned being at Interior over the past year or so is the enormity of that department and its responsibilities. One of the figures that wasn't mentioned, which is appropriate for today, is that we are the second largest producer of hydroelectricity in the nation with our generating dams, which is remarkable. And I was excited to learn that because my background as a corporate attorney was focused on the energy space, and the electricity markets are my long suit. So I've been able to bring some of that background to bear as well. Department of Interior also spans 12 time zones, believe it or not. We have about 70,000 employees, and we have about 2,600 operating locations. And by some measures, at least with the scientists in the USGS office, we manage the largest holdings of energy resources in the world, bar none. And before I started saying that publicly, I went up one side and down the other with the scientists, quizzing them on that, murder bird style, and they kept on coming back that that was the situation. So I have been saying that now for quite some time, and I do call them holdings because what we are doing is managing these assets not on behalf of the government, but on behalf of the taxpayers, which gets to a little bit to the point of why I am doing what I'm doing and why the position was created by President Trump and Secretary Zinke. For context, it may be helpful to know that I've known Secretary Zinke for quite some time. So we were friends before we started to work together. And I'm pleased to report we're still friends, even though we are working together, which is a nice thing to do. But the reality is the Department of Interior has had this vast energy portfolio since its inception. However, it hasn't had the type of priority that the current administration, political leadership have been providing it. So in other words, Department of Interior has a strong mission of conservation, and it is a strong steward of the environment, and there's no better friend than any of us could have with regards to conservation and environmental stewardship than Secretary Zinke. However, in addition to those two mission-critical functions, this administration has added a management, corporate management in the business sense, of the energy portfolio. So the secretary, when he was looking at this, he decided that it would be functionally smart to have somebody there that could coordinate the policy and management of all the energy portfolio, which permeates all aspects. We used to say 9 out of the 10 agencies within the department, but really it's 10 out of the 10 agencies, so that we can have harmonized energy policy across the board. And the purpose for that is, which was mentioned earlier, it really does have a strong revenue function within the Department of Interior for the federal government. And what we noticed when we began was that revenue was way, way down. On offshore alone, in 2006, there was about $18 billion of revenue coming into the federal government through the Department of Interior. In about 2016, it was down to about $2.8 billion. And so that's about a loss of, that's not a loss of $15 billion over the course of time. On average, it's about $10 billion a year. So why did that happen? So I was fortunate enough to be invited into this position to examine that and start looking at, is there a way to remedy that? And one of the first things I learned in doing some due diligence, and kind of in the corporate sense, looking at the numbers, was that in the energy economy, which is something I was close to, there was a lot of investment going on, and there was a lot of growth going on. However, there was no growth going on in federal lands. So you had investment in private lands, state lands, and other countries going like this, and you had investment going into federal holdings going down like this. So, and that's a problem, because as fiduciaries on behalf of the taxpayers to manage these assets, we got to figure out a better return on our equity. So in going out and talking to folks and looking at policies and examining how the dollars were flowing the way they were, it became readily apparent that the cost of compliance and the lack of regulatory certainty and stability and the duration of time that it was taking to do business with the federal government was really driving dollars to a different direction. So I'm kind of in the fortunate position to be able to examine as other places for energy investment dollars to flow as places of competition. So one of the first things we did is address the cultural change. And you probably saw that developing pretty strongly, not only politically, but also economically in this country over the past few years. But inside Interior, recognizing across all the agencies that the energy portfolio is not something that we should not be promoting. In fact, it's the opposite. We should be promoting our energy assets and wearing them proudly on our sleeves. The reason for that is that the energy economy in this country is as important as any other aspect of our economy. And as you've known, as I said earlier, it's growing. So the concept is promoting our energy economy, being proud of it, is not a new notion. Other countries do it. Most other countries do it. Canada does it. Mexico does it. Brazil. You can go down across the board, across the maps, and pick on the countries. Here in the United States, I think a little bit because we grow up as a woe is me consuming nation, reliant on the winds of OPEC, that we haven't quite realized it. But now, since everything's kind of been shifted in a record production mode, we need to start wearing our energy economy on our sleeve proudly. And for our responsibility within Interior, it's to make sure that that cultural shift is also happening, but without displacing the environmental and conservation focus as well, which, by the way, is kind of hand in hand. A lot of the conservation programs that we have are funded by the revenues that we receive from bids, leases, and royalty rates. So that's also an important component of money that flows out there into states even to protect parks as well. So all of this kind of works together. So as we started looking at reducing the cost of compliance, well, how would you do that? Well, one way to do it is to see if we could shorten time in terms of permitting, consultation, and things of that nature. Because if you look at what the federal government was doing, it took about 7 years to get through a NEPA process. And that wasn't all across the board, incidentally, in the federal government, but it's just way too long. I mean, these folks, they do have, especially the offshore guys, when they're investing in their energy, in their energy portfolio, they understand it takes, a certain amount of time before they can get to production. But the reality is, in order to drive dollars back to the federal government, we had to lower, as I said before, the cost of compliance. And one of the ways of doing that, by cost of compliance, I'm talking about it costs just basically more money to do business with the federal government than it does with other folks. And that's key because in order to drive those dollars back to federal holdings, the federal government has to be a better business partner, a more reliable business partner, just like folks do in everyday transactions. And I think my transactional background brings a lot to this position to help the department and the secretaries achieve the secretary's mission of focusing on that. But going back to bringing down the cost of compliance, shortening the time it takes for investors, those that want to invest in federal assets, to receive their permits is a function that we can do procedurally. And we have issued a slew of secretarial orders to achieve just that. And the reality is, this is nothing new for the federal government. One of the other things I have in my background is being a FERC lawyer, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission lawyer. Not that I ever worked at FERC, but I have represented folks from the outside before FERC. And FERC has a nice, for interstate gas pipelines, process. It has a 1-year pre-application phase, and then it has another year for the formal application. And then within that, working with staff and working through mitigation matters, you can generally predict, as a project proponent, as an investor, what your permitting timeline, your certificate timeline is going to be with FERC. Now, FERC doesn't have any other NEPA than any other federal agency. We all operate under the same NEPA, and none of us can change NEPA, by the way. That will take Congress. So we are not changing NEPA. It's how you process the required environmental protocols. And when I don't say what we do is streamlining, because streamlining, at least to me, and I think to many stakeholders, means that you are actually cutting away certain elements that need to be considered. We are not doing any of that. Expediting is different. Expediting is making smart, reasonable, well thought out decisions in a quicker time frame and holding folks to it. So you may have noticed, and I'm surprised, a lot of people have not, but in this room you may have, a few weeks ago, a bunch of agencies got together and signed a memorandum of understanding. It's called the One Federal Decision. And you will see that it mirrors that 2-year process. In fact, the president even mentioned it in his State of the Union earlier this year. But the reality is, it also has some other interesting elements in it in the MOU provisions. One is, if you have jurisdiction, you need to be a cooperating agency. And I'm a huge fan of cooperating agencies. I've been promoting that for many years now, and I would even encourage state agencies to be a cooperating agency with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, because it doesn't give you decision-making power, but it gives you a seat at the table, and I just think it's a more efficient way to do business. I mean, there are arguments against it, which I won't get in now, but it is part of our One Federal Decision MOU, and the reality is, if you do have any jurisdiction of the environmental review for a major project, you have to be a cooperating agency, which is key, because that's something else we have mirrored inside the Department of Interior. It used to be that all the agencies would operate independently within Interior. So Park Service and the Fish Service and BLM, they weren't necessarily cooperating and they weren't necessarily communicating. So early on, we would see comments from the Park Service against the BLM record of a decision, and it just didn't make any sense, let alone under the same administration, but under the same roof at Interior, you were having different decisions across the line for a single project. And more importantly, back to the cost of compliance theme I think I'm running with today, is that when you're a project proponent, you have to deal with several different agencies across the board inside Interior. You know what that means? That means several different staff, different field biologists, different biological opinions, and go down everything's different if they're not operating together. So we are changing that as well, and that is also part of the cultural shift. And I think the cultural shift is important because, as was mentioned earlier, Department of Interior is a management organization, which makes it a really fun place to work, I think, for everybody there. Everybody, and this is what I've learned there too, has some type of serious management function. It's a little bit different. I had some experience at Department of Energy, where that seems to be more of a program agency, where they collect money and distribute it out to various R&D programs in the labs, aside from the important nuclear portfolio. Interior, a lot of the career professionals and political appointees are actually managing. So it seems to be, when you make these cultural shifts in terms of priorities or adding priorities, which have really always been there in the first place, there is an element of excitement about that. But to memorialize that, what the Secretary has initiated is a reorganization plan. Because it's important from his perspective and this administration's perspective that if you are going to be a better business partner, if you are going to make decisions that are focused on environmental stewardship, and if you are going to make decisions that put conservation as a top priority, a lot of those decisions don't need to be made here inside the Beltway, because most of what we manage outside of offshore wind is way out west. So the Secretary in his reorganization would like and has been encouraging a lot of these decisions to be made by senior executives throughout the department, closer to where they impact the actual communities. You've heard the Secretary talk about it from the beginning. Department of Interior needs to be a better neighbor. And the way of achieving that is to do this reorganization where you shift personnel and decisions out west. Another way of doing that is to change the way the Department of Interior makes its decisions and does business. So his proposal, which you may have seen, includes 13 regions, so that when a particular decision is made for a specific project or a specific policy, those within that region, across all the agencies within DOI, can participate. he also has been talking about is the joint command type of structure, so that there is and you see this sometimes in the corporate world, you mostly see it in the military world, where you see a shifting of leadership over those regions so that everybody has an equal opportunity to be a leader and learn and communicate and share. So this reorganization is something that is going to have longevity to it, because what I believe we're going to find is that these type of cultural shifts and organizational shifts are going to achieve efficiencies. And when you achieve efficiencies and you achieve better decisions quicker, those type of policy changes seem to outlast 8 years of President Trump and beyond, because they're just good common sense government. And the important thing here too is creating better documents and making better documented decisions. We saw early on that it was the amount of judicial review in a negative way was pretty painful that we were absorbing. And not from our decisions, from prior administrations with an S, decisions that end up going to the courts and into judges, and the judges just say, oh my God, OSM, or not to pick on them, but one of the agencies just didn't do their job, go back and do their job. Well, that's a problem because the documents weren't sufficient, and we have examined that. And one of the reasons why documents were defective, at least according to judges, is that there seemed to be a lot of cutting and pasting going on between projects in the consulting world. And I'm not picking on any particular consultant, but we could see it. It was evident. You could see information in a record of a decision, or any file for that matter, that was completely irrelevant to the project at hand. So clearly it had to come from someplace. So in the business world, at my old law firm, I didn't cut and paste anything from client to client, from project to project. It didn't make any sense. Each project was different. Each transaction was different. So most documents are created from whole cloth. So we're paying a closer eye to creating better documents so that they have a better chance of withstanding judicial scrutiny. And that's another way you have longevity in some of these policy shifts. So we're very happy with the way, and I do believe the career professionals throughout the agency are very happy with the way we have been prioritizing and reorganizing and managing the Department of Interior. Clearly, we've been doing an awful lot in a short amount of time, but that's okay. We like to operate, as the phrase say, at the speed of decision. We like decisions being made in the field. A lot of times I think some of the thought process is, well, if I don't make a decision, then I'm not going to get in trouble. Well, that's not our philosophy, and there's a whole discussion that can go with that. The Secretary has explicitly told the career executives and the political leadership at the Department of Interior, we're all accountable for our jobs. We all have performance metrics, but most importantly, you got to do your job. So make a decision. He understands that not every decision made throughout the department is going to be aligned with his thinking. But at least if you're making a decision, you're moving the ball further down the field, and eventually, if it does need the Secretary's attention and modulation, it will happen. But a lot of that has occurred specifically with projects, small projects, large projects that have been stuck in the mud for several years. And once he kind of gave that cultural message out, please just make a decision, and we can always be examined. It's not a gotcha exercise. Things started to move quicker and better. There have been projects, literally, that have been languishing on somebody's desk, for 7 years that we have been able to move within 7 months. And that's all just good government. I mean, there's no politics or anything else behind that. That's just good common sense government. Government has a job to do. Sometimes, by the way, our philosophy is sometimes the government doesn't have a job to do, right? One of the best things government can do, even though we have the ability to regulate in a certain sector, or we have discretion to exercise oversight, doesn't mean that you have to regulate for the sake of regulating. So we're addressing that culture as well. Being an old agency, I think it's 1849, which mirrors our address, gives us we don't have as strongly defined parallel lines within to operate as, say, some of our more relatively recent agencies like the EPA or DOE. So we were formed at a time when cabinet members had a lot of discretion, and Secretary Zinke does exercise that discretion, and I think we are doing it in a way that is motivating not only the career professionals that are there because of being able to make a decision, but also the longer-term policy goals of this department. And part of my job, to go back to the beginning, is to help the department achieve more revenues by bringing down the cost of compliance. And the way we are measuring that is through actual analytics. We have an economics office, primarily with ONRR, and we have folks that are able to look at production and revenue numbers. And we have reversed the trends, I'm happy to say, and we are trajectorying back up. And we're getting near monthly reports now on what that looks like. You know, when I first started, talk about bringing some business concepts to the government, we asked for the monthly reports of last month's for production, and we were told they don't exist. Well, you know, we're trying to be nimble, quick, efficient, do a lot in a short amount of time. And how can you change in real time, relatively real time, your policy decisions if they're not having an effect, if you don't have the numbers to back up for our due diligence? Lo and behold, we went through an exercise. We got 6 months figures, annual figures, 6 months figures, quarterly, and now monthly, and that's all very helpful. And so it's remarkable, you know, what one administration can change in years of a single department that has been doing something the same way over and over again, at least on the energy portfolio and on the metric side, with managing assets that are so important to this country's economy and so important to the taxpayers. And one issue I'll address before I give myself the hook, I think I was only given 10 minutes, I might be there by now, is that we are not, I think there's this thought out there, this wrong thought out there, that we at Interior, this administration, is drill baby drill personified. We are not. We are all of the above, and everything we have done so far has been basically unlocking the tools that have been in the shed, you know, for the past decade or so. And what I mean by that is we have not opened up any new areas yet that haven't been designated for these purposes by prior administrations or by Congress. And I think that's key to understand. So we are all of the above. We are definitely for multiple use, and we always implement best practices and best science in all of our decisions. So thank you for having me here today. I look forward to it.
Well, thank you, Counselor, for those opening remarks. It's very interesting to hear what you're thinking about the department. One of the things that both you and David mentioned and that I learned when I was at the Interior Department is how very important it is to the energy industry. I think a lot of people think the Department of Energy has the portfolio to cover energy for the federal government, when in fact much of the resources on federal lands are being developed within the Department of the Interior. It's very important. So I want to go back to your explanation of your position, because it is a new one in this administration. What is it that you will be doing that is different from past administrations? How will you coordinate with the other bureaus within the administration, the Assistant Secretary, for example, for Land and Minerals, the White House, other departments? How does that all work together now with you there?
It works very well. It's been working great, you know, for the past, 14 months or so. One of the tools that the Secretary used to establish his position was a secretarial order, which is key. It's one thing to be in the Secretary's office and have the imprimatur of the Secretary. That's a great thing. You can go around the country with that and get a lot done. But it's another thing to have a secretarial order behind your position in your office, which assigns specific responsibilities to no one else in the department, so that folks understand where those decisions are going to be made and how, to your point, coordination and operation is going to continue. So I think starting off with the secretarial order was a great tool to have. The other components and one of the things that we established in that, in terms of communication throughout the various agencies, office, and bureaus across the country at DOI, was establishing a energy liaisons group. So at the very beginning, I asked every director, didn't have to be anybody, it could be anybody they wanted, appoint somebody who could participate in this energy liaisons group that I chaired. And we started off with that, and that was really primarily a communication channel. And I was surprised. I was a little skeptical whether it was going to work or not. But the eagerness of folks to participate in that and to continue to participate in that in person and on conference call has really been a remarkable channel, not only to discuss the Secretary's priorities, but also to receive feedback. Initially, I received so much information from the field, as it's called, that it was overwhelming. But we were able to triage and address a lot of issues on the project side that were important to those. They really didn't feel that they were able to channel effectively through their hallways. We certainly, when the hallways are the different, as you know, is what we call ASLM or BLM, et cetera. It's just where their main offices are. But they felt that going through the hallways, not that we encourage people to respect the hallways always, but it just seemed to be a slower process. And all we do, essentially, is when we're given information that brings certain questions to it, we just ask for additional information. And we have a conversation, and if a decision needs to be made one way or another and the Secretary agrees with it, it just seems to happen quicker that way. So that's one of the other tools that we have for coordination.
So it's coordination. The decision-making process is still within the Bureau, or is it at the secretarial level or at your level, or does it depend on what the decision is?
Yeah, well, it's not everything rises to the level of the Secretary's office. And I think that overall, the message, the department-wide message of priorities coming from the Secretary certainly resonates, but each decision doesn't come to our office. So at the beginning, a lot of decisions were being made in Washington, right? It just seemed to be, and that's no way to run a railroad. And that's not how the Secretary wants to see things shake out. We want the decisions, as I said earlier, to be made out in the field, closer to where the communities that are impacted by these decisions. However, we found at the beginning there were certain things, whether it was dealing with big issues like venting and flaring or big projects that were languishing, we certainly got involved. And I'm kind of a deal lawyer. I don't mind getting into the weeds of a deal. It's something I enjoy doing. So, kind of enabled to do as we examine what the opportunity or examine what the challenge is, whether or not we want to get directly engaged.
Mm-hmm. Past presidents have talked about energy independence. I think President Trump is the first to use the term energy dominance when talking about his goals for the United States. And I'm just curious, most people, when they hear that and they listen to the president and to Secretary Zinke, they think about oil, gas, and a lot about coal as well nowadays. How does the advanced and the renewable energy fit into that puzzle of energy dominance?
Yeah, energy dominance is something that we talk about. It's an energy dominance strategy, is really what it is. And as I mentioned earlier, we are all the above, and I'll give some specific examples to that. But just to give a little context, I think. So when I was at the Department of Energy, we would talk about energy interdependence, and then we would talk about energy independence. Here now, we're talking about energy dominance, and one of my recent meetings with the State Department, they have been talking about the United States as an energy superpower, which ultimately may be the best place to describe exactly who we are and what we're doing, and we're an energy superpower, perhaps by our energy dominance strategy. And one of the other fun things about this administration, comparing it back to my prior experience, without being negative about prior administrations, is that this administration, amongst its agencies, is remarkable in its communication with each other. There's a lot more, like I said, just based on my past experience, discussion with State Department, Department of Energy, EPA, Commerce, Defense, you name it. In fact, which I don't think has been done before, this administration's through the NEC and SEC, we have weekly meetings, standing meetings on our calendar with myself, the chief of staffs of other energy-related agencies. Now, we don't meet every week, but it's on our calendar. And some of us not everybody has to be there, but we get together and communicate and discuss priorities and what we're doing. So we are fully functioning, and there's a lot of cooperation, there's a lot of teamwork in this administration, which I think isn't necessarily recognized, because why would you recognize it unless you're on the inside? I just bring it up because of the coordination aspect, and it triggered a thought in my mind. One of the pleasures of being in this administration is its level of cooperation. And the reality is, along with that, we're certainly aware of what DOE is doing on the advanced technologies front, and they're aware of what we are. And one of the things that we're promoting in terms of the energy dominance strategy, it's domestically produced, is offshore wind. So the renewables economy that is coming online in the United States is a new part of the energy economy, and it's something Secretary Zinke, myself, and others are focused on at the Department of Interior. Pretty interesting to be on the ground floor of a new energy sector in the United States, because there have been certain lease sales, but we're really just starting to look on that. Again, to my point, at least wearing my hat, is how can we maximize the return on that investment for the taxpayers, because the first lease sale for an offshore wind block was $200,000, right? And these guys, they're making plenty of money. And the one after that was in New York, shortly after that, was like $40 million. And we're going to be doing some more lease sales, and there's already interest in it. But I can't wait to see, how much money the taxpayers are going to be making off these blocks that we put up for bidding, because this whole component of the offshore wind industry hasn't really been fully explored before in the United States. So it's really thrilling, to be part of this advanced technology. And talk about advanced technology. These are 9 megawatt turbines. Holy mackerel! Which I thought, quite frankly, I thought that was prototype or a concept. No, they're actually producing them, right? So this is the technology that's being brought stateside. And so our role in all that is to encourage that technology by creating a pipeline, a supply chain, because that will end up being, these are too large, these are generation units that are too large to ship. So that means jobs in Norfolk or New Bedford, wherever they end up doing it. And that's all part of energy dominance, domestic supply, security, and economic drivers that are helpful to us all.
Mm-hmm. Now, the last administration spent a lot of time in the Interior Department talking about advanced technologies and that sort of thing. Just wondering, have you made any changes to the existing regulations or policies, or do you plan to make any changes, or are you happy with where you are now?
So we made a lot of changes in a short amount of time, with the primary focus of not displacing any of our environmental stewardship mission and maintaining our conservation, but also at the same time examining technical aspects of the regulation that may not achieve their desired outcome and disenable a part of our economy to thrive. So a lot of our changes out front were just modulating prior regulations to ensure that the energy economy on federal lands would be equitable with that on state lands as well. Because a lot of the regulations on state lands aren't too much different than what we are exercising now On the federal side, again, I'll just emphasize the federal government. One of the things we have to deal with that the states do not is NEPA, and we're okay with that, which is how we process NEPA is I think one of the big changes, especially with Fast 41 has always been on the books. We're actually using that now. It's online. You can see the dashboard for projects. Offshore wind, we're allowing for multiple designs to be submitted for a certain farm, which is a new change we adopted from Europe. So yeah, there was a lot, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of tools in the shed that we are unlocking. But at the same time, we're trying to be a little innovative by best practices for sectors that we don't have immediate experience with from places that do have it.
Now, I know you went to Denmark and saw their technology, and they really are leaders in the offshore wind area. What did you take from them to bring back to the United States, and how will you put that into regulatory law here?
I took back a lot. So I'm a reluctant traveler. I mean, we all do a lot of traveling. And, several stakeholders insisted, I got to go to Copenhagen. I got to go check this out. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to go to Denmark and big time suck. I mean, we know the drill, and who needs to do that? And anyway, I was convinced to go, and I'm so glad I did. I got so much more from that trip than we have busy day lives, we have family lives, so we condense a lot in these trips. These are we do a lot in a short amount of time on these trips. And that particular trip, I extracted so much knowledge and information. And I think when I came back, you can see the shift in the federal government at the Department of Interior from which has traditionally been, I think, dragging its feet a little bit on the offshore wind program to quicking it and developing that pipeline so that we can see jobs in the future in that sector. But my takeaway, I think, from a bureaucratic or process sense was the one-stop shop that their energy ministry has. So that's one of the reasons we're doing that at Interior is because of what we learned there. But kind of, again, more communicating with some of the other agencies. The Department of Defense also has this as well. The Department of Interior doesn't have it, but we are developing that as we speak. So that was one of the other takeaways. And the other takeaway primarily was if you go over there and you see the manufacturing/shipyard site where these turbines are being made and these blades are being manufactured, there's a lot of white hats going around. So you could see the opportunity for real jobs that we don't have in this country yet that could come over here. So I came back being maybe somewhat of a skeptic. My law practice was built on renewable energy, starting in around 2008. And so I know everything about it, but the offshore wind stuff, having been in Boston and seeing the Cape Wind, the way that played out, I was as skeptic as anybody, which may have been my reluctance too to go do the travel to Denmark. But boy, am I glad that I did, because everything's changed in my head in that sector.
It's funny you should mention Cape Wind, because when I was at Interior in the 90s, they came in for the first time, and at that time we had no idea whether we even had authority over offshore wind in the offshore program. I'm going to ask you one more question generally about advanced technologies, and I think we need to open it up to the floor for questions, don't you? And that is, you hear about ocean wave, ocean currents, perhaps offshore solar. Is any of that near to happening now?
So I would think that the closest thing I think happening in terms of next generation is going to be the floating turbines, because if California wants to meet its RPS, I don't think, my opinion, that they're going to be able to do it all by solar. And even though they have a lot of land, solar's a difficult pill to swallow sometimes, because once you put a utility scale solar array up, that's all the land's good for. So much, you can't do the multiple use type of strategy with that. And the other aspect of solar, especially with the CSP, it gets very hot, and birds do get infected by that, and they get zapped, for lack of a better word, and they die. And then insects come, and then when more insects come, then the birds come. So solar has a few hiccups that need to be wrinkled out. But I think floating I think some of the floating turbines, as I look into this, not so much the title. I don't see much happening with the title. It kind of happened, but I'd also aspect from my perspective to interior is with regards to advanced technology, and also the hydro portfolio. So we're examining, how there's maintenance backlog and all that stuff. It's the government, so we want to address that, perhaps with some of these new revenues that we're making. But I think bringing some of the better more efficient hydro technology to our non-generating dams will be a key aspect as well.
Okay, great. Why don't we throw it open to the group here?
Yes, coming in.
The mic's coming.
Hi, Jeff Epping with Energis LLC. How does the administration view energy development on tribal lands? Is it a focus?
Yes, absolutely. So we have a Bureau of Indian Affairs. I also chair something called the Royalty Policy Committee, where we have academic, tribal, industry, and public sector representation. And we're very much focused on helping energy development on tribal lands. Matter of fact, it was raised in one of the meetings that I was participating in with the president. And what we're trying, if you talk to the leadership, the tribal leadership, they don't want the federal government involved at all. Now I'm paraphrasing, I'm not speaking for anybody, but generally that's the message that we receive. Well, we believe that there has to be a certain element of oversight and cooperation as well. And I think there's economies of scale to that, and there's efficiencies. But the secretary knows, so I'm unique, right? Most senior executives at the Department of Interior are from out west. I happen to be from the Northeast, from Massachusetts, of all places, right? EGAD. So I don't have, historically, I've not dealt with those issues. However, the secretary has. Nobody knows those issues and dives more deeply into them than him. So yeah, it's a focus. I had a meeting with him this morning where these issues came up, and he knows them cold and he deals with them personally.
We have another question right here in the front.
Hi, I'm Bob Hershey. I'm a consultant. Could you tell us more how you deal with the trade-offs of energy, environment, and cost?
Sure. In our perspective, there aren't any trade-offs. It's all up. So, for instance, it's important to notice that even though we are focused on increasing production and revenue, we're not increasing the footprint, right? There's directional drilling. There's a whole bunch of other issues that can be resolved there. And the trade-off from our perspective is that in doing better environmental reviews and creating better records of decision, you're looking at both the environmental benefits and the environmental impact and the economic impact of specific projects. And that's what the president issued early out of his administration. And so the result of that is a more thoughtful, thorough examination of all projects and environmental and other documents that go into a record of decision. So I don't think it's a trade-off. I think there's a net benefit that's being thought through, which is helpful to not only the energy economy and making sure that we're focused on it and proud on it, because the reality is any production here is going to displace production elsewhere. That's just, we're part of the global markets there. And nobody does energy production better than the U.S., period. We're cleaner, we're more responsible. I mean, we meet with these executives, and we meet with the folks working in the field. In Alaska, if they're smoking a cigarette, they don't flick it in the snow or in the grass. They put it in their Coke can and take it off site. So the secretary always says, he's got the Boy Scout model, which is great because I enjoy that program as well. But you leave your site as good or better than when you found it. And those in the field that are doing this have that same mentality.
Can I follow up on that question about NEPA? There are those on one side who say NEPA is you have to spend a lot of time working on that. It's so important. And the other side is, let's limit it to the least amount of time as possible. And I always say to people, NEPA is really process rich. I mean, you don't decide what is going to happen based on NEPA. It's just a process that you have to follow. And I'm wondering, when you cut down the time for the record of decision, if you have a 2-year process, do you perhaps shoot yourself in the foot by not having gone through the process thoroughly enough to defend against those judicial suits that will probably come up as a result of your decision making?
Right. So part of the expedited process is also being project specific. So some of the policy choices that could be made with regards to NEPA procedure is how big an examination has to be done for a particular project. Do we have to require a project proponent to do a study on the site for impacts 20, 30, 40 years out? Or can we limit that to 5 years or 10 years? Or can we look at studies that we already have in camp for that specific area that are helpful too? So do we have to create new information where information already exists? And do we have to ask for information that isn't necessarily relevant? So that's one of the ways that we can address the process, which is something, what I say is protocols, which we cannot tinker with. We can address the process to meet the requirements of the protocols.
You have other questions out in the audience? Back here in the back.
Hi, Aaron Annelbaum at the Canadian Embassy. Councillor, thanks for your remarks. I was wondering if I could get your views on how actions on steel tariffs and quotas could affect the infrastructure construction that's needed to advance your energy dominance strategy. Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. So the tariffs and trade discussion is part of a larger conversation which is not necessarily in the purview of the Department of Interior. But I will say, so far, I haven't seen, and we get lobbied or advocated before on all these issues, which is great, because one of the other fun things about this administration is because of the communication, people will come to us on issues that aren't directly within our purview to express their interests and see how we could be helpful if it's a reasonable thing to do, or simply to see what information we may be able to share with them if that's an appropriate thing to do as well. But at large, I have not, because I'm very close, obviously, to these projects, and I've seen any significant or hasn't even registered on the scale of any impact from those thoughts at all, other than, we all read about it in the trades, but up close and personal to these project proponents and stakeholders, no, I've seen none.
What about the big wind turbines that would have to come in for the wind projects? You don't think those would be affected?
Well, there's also an ability to apply for exemptions as well, and since we haven't kind of jumped off that bridge yet, so to speak, it's hypothetical. So where we're going to be at that point in time is unsure. But no, I don't. All I can tell you is from experience in the meetings that I've had that it hasn't been impactful yet.
Other questions? I think we have time for a couple more.
Hi, thanks so much for coming. I'm Alex Stapleton. I'm with the British Embassy. I think I'm primarily curious on offshore wind, but there may be other industries that you might have some thoughts on this on. You talked a lot about one federal decision and even bringing in some state authorities to hear their perspective. What about local communities? Because a lot of these projects have local consenting issues. Just be curious to hear your thoughts.
Yes. So one of the things that I'm doing with regards to, I don't do just offshore wind. I do oil, gas, coal too, but we don't seem to be talking about that today. A lot of this is relevant there as well. But one of the things I'm doing on the offshore wind, because it is so localized and these stakeholder impact can be literally at the beachfront, is that we're directly coordinating with the states in New York, in Massachusetts, in Virginia, New Jersey, and others, we have a direct communication. I personally go meet with the governor's head, a lead on the offshore issue, so that they understand. One of the things that I end up doing is, or early on, is educating that this is actually a part of our portfolio and something we're working aggressively on. So that's a fun part, to make sure that there's focus, also to open up that line of communication. But more importantly, to your point, is when it does come to doing the actual permitting, that there can be a level of reciprocation between state and federal government, which I'm a big believer in. And so part of opening up that dialogue, those discussions that I have are all about that type of cooperation on the permitting sides. However, what we also are sensitive to, and the Secretary is very much focused on this, the fishing industry, the shellfish and the fishermen, those are all important components of this future part of our economy. And they have a seat at the table in this administration just as much as anybody else does.
We had one more question over here.
Hello, my name is George Raskowitz. I'm from the George Washington University. I was wondering the extent of purview that the DOI has over pipeline construction, and especially surrounding the increasing LNG exports.
Yeah, because I think, I just throw this out there, because I think of one of the great things about this job, and Secretary Zinke does a fabulous part of doing this as well, is advocating or advertising that the Department of Interior does manage this vast, this enormous, largest in the world energy portfolio. So I think because of that, I was invited to speak at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce LNG conference, like the first time the Department of Interior was ever invited to an LNG conference. And so we talk about that in terms of the larger energy dominant strategy, but also pipelines are important too, because, and it also goes towards the reorg and other infrastructure. It could be transmission. Some of it crosses federal land, some of it crosses state land, some of it crosses Indian land. So how do you deal with all that? So when we did these regions, part of the thinking, they're around water boundaries. They're not done. Well, we were going to restructure BLM, but the governor's like a BLM director pretty much for every state, so that didn't change much. But we did it through water boundaries just to kind of get the system more normalized, at least from tort interior management perspective, because we did Bureau of Reclamation as well. But to get one decision for one project from all the agencies within Interior in a more reasonable fashion, so that the project proponents and the project opponents don't have to run around the Department of Interior and have several different meetings. Because if you go to Fish and Wildlife, they'll be like, well, we're not going to issue a permit until it's not timely because BLM hasn't made their decision or the Park Service hasn't made their decision. It's crazy, right? And so we're really focused on making that process smoother. It's just a better government. It's just common sense government. It has nothing to do with being a project proponent or opponent. It's just a better way for people to deal with the government.
Any final words on some of the other energy issues at Interior? I know there's ANWR. We're waiting to see what will happen there. There's the offshore 5-year program, which is in process. Any about other things than the advanced energy that you'd like to give us
How much
an
time
update
do
on?
I have? Right. No,
2 minutes.
That's perfect. I mean, Gulf of Mexico, you got the basins. A lot of that is humming, and we're very much focused on making sure that our energy economy is something that we are proud of, something that we are managing in a responsible way, and we're continually. Hopefully, your takeaway today is that we are definitely all above. I'd like pinpointing out this new sector of the energy economy that is literally coming online very soon, which is remarkable. And we're multiple use, and Secretary Zinke is an excellent steward of the environment, and I'm happy to be his friend. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming. Really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Great conversation.